Imagine this. The sprawling, sun-soaked hills of Montecito are quiet, the palm trees swaying gently in the coastal breeze, but inside one of its most luxurious estates, chaos is erupting. A scream pierces the calm. Prince Harry, the once cheeky, light-hearted spare who charmed millions around the world, is heard raising his voice in fury. And not just any words, he's allegedly shouting at his wife, Meghan Markle. "You thief! Get out right now." Those words, raw, visceral, dripping with betrayal, hang in the air like shattered glass. And the accusation? That Meghan had stolen something that wasn't just valuable, it was sacred. The very jewels of Princess Diana. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Now pause for a moment and let that sink in. Can you even imagine the weight of that? This isn't about money, fame, or Hollywood contracts. This is about the legacy of one of the most beloved women of the modern age. Diana's jewels weren't just stones and metals. They were memories, promises, and symbols of love that Harry and William clung to after losing their mother. So why, then, would Harry ever believe his own wife, the woman he walked away from royalty for, had betrayed him in this way? We need to talk about the whispers, the rumors, the unspoken tensions that have been bubbling beneath the surface of Montecito's golden facade. Because this wasn't some random outburst, some heat-of-the-moment misunderstanding. No, this fight, this scream, was years in the making. Every snub, every slight, every jewel worn or requested that raised eyebrows in London, it all built up to this breaking point. But here's the real question. What would drive a prince, a man who has defended Meghan relentlessly in front of the world, to suddenly explode and call her a thief? Was it about one piece of jewelry? Or was it about something much deeper? Something that's been haunting Harry ever since his mother's tragic death? Viewers, this is where the story takes a darker turn. Because what Diana left behind wasn't just her memory, it was her possessions. 2 boys, 2 grieving sons, were promised to split her treasures one day. And those jewels weren't supposed to be leveraged, flaunted, or repurposed for Hollywood glamour. They were meant to be carried forward with dignity, to remind her children of the woman she was. Yet here we are, with whispers of Montecito showdowns and accusations that her most cherished heirlooms had been mishandled, or worse. Now think about Meghan's journey for a second. An actress, once hustling for roles in Hollywood, suddenly catapulted into royalty. Overnight, her wardrobe, her image, her very identity changed. Cameras caught her every move, and with it, the jewelry she wore. Remember the outrage when Meghan appeared in public wearing Diana's butterfly earrings? Or the bracelet Diana wore during iconic appearances? Some saw it as sweet, others as opportunistic. But to the royals behind the scenes, every jewel carried weight. Every appearance mattered, and Meghan seemed determined to wear Diana's legacy as her own. Is that what sparked Harry's rage in Montecito? Was it the slow realization that what Meghan desired most wasn't just him, but the crown, the legacy, and yes, the jewels? Let's not forget, Meghan had long been compared to Diana. The press loved the angle at first, the beautiful outsider who won a prince's heart. But as time went on, the comparisons shifted. Meghan, critics argued, wanted to be Diana 2.0, not in spirit, but in spotlight. And what better way to cement that image than by donning Diana's jewels? But here's where it all becomes chilling. When does admiration cross into appropriation? When does honoring a memory turn into exploiting it? Now picture Harry, the boy who walked behind Diana's coffin, the teenager who clenched his jaw in silence as the world watched his grief. That boy grew into a man who never fully healed. Diana's belongings weren't just keepsakes. They were his connection to the mother he lost too soon. And now, decades later, in his own home, in his supposed sanctuary with the woman he risked everything for, he allegedly found those very heirlooms being misused. Can you imagine the heartbreak? Neighbors have whispered about late-night arguments, about staff overhearing heated words. But on this particular night, the story goes that Harry's fury reached a level no one had ever seen before. The words thief and get out didn't just slip from his lips. They roared out like a wound bursting open. For a man who has spent his life protecting Meghan from criticism, to call her that, what does that tell you? It tells us something snapped. Something so sacred, so untouchable, had been crossed. And this brings us back to Diana's jewels. Do you know the backstory? After Diana's death, her personal jewelry collection was left to her sons. The idea was simple. When they married, their wives would inherit select pieces. William, when he proposed to Kate, famously gave her Diana's sapphire engagement ring, a symbol of love, legacy, and continuity. Harry, too, had his share, bracelets, earrings, and more. But here's the twist. The brothers had once made a pact that these items would never divide them, that Diana's treasures would bind them together, not tear them apart. Yet, in Montecito, that promise seemed to crumble. Now ask yourself, was Meghan simply the spark that lit the fire? Or was she holding on to jewels that Harry feared would slip away forever, into Hollywood circles, into red carpets and photo shoots where Diana's spirit would become little more than a costume? We need to consider Meghan's perspective too. She has always argued that she was treated unfairly by the press, scrutinized more harshly than any other royal bride. To her, wearing Diana's jewels might have felt like validation, proof that she was, in fact, part of the legacy, not an outsider. But intention doesn't erase perception. To Harry, and perhaps to William, every jewel was sacred, and to see them handled any other way could feel like betrayal. But let me ask you, if Meghan truly saw herself as the keeper of Diana's memory, why would Harry accuse her of theft? Why use such brutal words in a moment of rage? Unless, of course, there was more to the story. Insiders say that some of Diana's pieces had gone missing, replaced by replicas. Others whisper that Meghan wanted to redesign certain jewels to modernize them. Imagine Harry discovering that his mother's heirlooms had been tampered with, reshaped, or even copied. That kind of violation doesn't just break trust, it shatters it. And this is where things get truly haunting. Because Harry's accusation that night wasn't just about jewelry. It was about betrayal on the deepest level. When he screamed, "Thief," he wasn't just talking about gems. He was talking about his mother's spirit, his family's honor, and perhaps even his own sense of identity being stolen. So here we are, standing at the edge of Montecito's carefully manicured lawns, peering inside at a marriage that once seemed like a fairy tale, but now looks more like a battlefield. What really happened that night? Did Meghan cross a line she couldn't come back from? Did Harry's grief finally boil over into rage? Or is the truth even darker than we imagine? Because make no mistake, this story isn't about glittering jewels in a locked box. It's about the ghosts of Diana, about promises broken, and about the lengths people will go to wear a crown, even if it's invisible. And just when you think it couldn't get more shocking, let me leave you with this. What Harry discovered that night wasn't just about Meghan. It opened up a series of questions about his brother William, about the royal pact, and about whether the jewels themselves had already been compromised long before Montecito ever entered the picture. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. So let me ask you this. What happens when the walls of Montecito, those lushly guarded walls designed to keep the outside world at bay, suddenly become the very stage of betrayal? When the screams inside a gilded mansion drown out the peace of the California night? That's exactly what unfolded on that fateful evening. The neighbors, accustomed to quiet elegance and celebrity discretion, were stunned by what they heard. Prince Harry, the man who once held his wife's hand through storms of press attacks and royal estrangement, was now the one raising his voice with words so sharp they could cut diamonds. "You thief! Get out right now!" But why? Why here? Why now? Why, after years of defending Meghan against accusations, against tabloids, against even his own family, would Harry turn his rage on the very woman he sacrificed everything for? The truth, as insiders whisper, lies in the room where it happened. A room where safes weren't safe enough, where jewels whispered with ghosts of the past, and where Harry saw something he couldn't unsee. Picture the estate that night. The Montecito mansion glowed with its usual elegance, candles flickering, soft lights illuminating curated art on pristine walls. Staff had retreated for the evening. Meghan had dismissed them early, claiming she needed private time to prepare for an event. But Harry had grown suspicious. In recent weeks, he'd noticed subtle changes. A necklace missing, a bracelet he hadn't approved of suddenly resurfacing on Meghan's wrist in glossy magazine spreads. And then came the discovery. It wasn't dramatic at first. A door slightly ajar. A jewelry box not where it should have been. Harry, restless, followed his instincts into the private room where Meghan sometimes retreated. And there it was, the unmistakable velvet casing, the faint glimmer of heirlooms that belonged not to Meghan, not even to Harry alone, but to Diana. This was no casual handling. This was not Meghan simply admiring her late mother-in-law's treasures. No. According to whispers, Meghan had been trying them on, arranging them, even consulting with a stylist about alterations. The idea? To modernize Diana's jewels for her own public appearances. Can you imagine the audacity? Can you picture Harry's heart stopping in that instant? He froze, torn between disbelief and rage. And when Meghan noticed him standing there, silence shattered into fury. What followed was a confrontation so raw, so explosive, it shook the walls of Montecito. Meghan tried to defend herself. She claimed she had every right to the jewels as Harry's wife, as the mother of his children, as a duchess in her own right. She spun her argument with confidence, even arrogance, saying Diana would have wanted her jewels to shine again in public, to inspire. But Harry didn't buy it. Not this time. For years, he had defended Meghan's every move, every choice, even when it alienated him from his brother, from his father, from his homeland. But this cut deeper than titles or tabloids. These were the symbols of Diana's love, his childhood, the promise that she would never be forgotten. And in his eyes, Meghan wasn't honoring Diana. She was exploiting her. So the words burst out, jagged, uncontrolled, and impossible to take back. "You thief, get out right now." Neighbors reported the echo. Staff the next morning noticed tension so thick you could slice it with a knife. Meghan's face was tight, defiant, while Harry seemed hollow, broken, his voice hoarse from the night before. And yet, the drama didn't end there. Because in Montecito, whispers travel faster than the ocean breeze. Calls were made. Friends confided in friends. And soon, what was supposed to be a private family outburst began spilling into the gossip mills of Hollywood and, eventually, across the Atlantic back to London. But here's what you need to ask yourself. Was this really the first time Harry had confronted Meghan about Diana's jewels? Or was this just the eruption of a volcano that had been rumbling for years? Some sources suggest that William had warned Harry long ago, that he had reminded his younger brother of the pact they made after their mother's passing, an unbreakable promise that Diana's belongings would always be treated with reverence, shared with fairness, never divided by ambition. And maybe Harry remembered that promise as he looked at Meghan that night, adorned with jewels she had no right to alter. The fight didn't just reveal cracks in Harry and Meghan's marriage. It reignited questions about Diana's legacy itself. If her sons could not protect her memory from exploitation, who could? If her heirlooms could be used as bargaining chips in a Hollywood reinvention, then what did her legacy mean anymore? Let's pause here. Imagine you are Harry in that room. You see the jewels. You see Meghan. You remember the pact. You feel your mother's absence as sharply as you did when you were 12 years old, walking behind her coffin in front of the world. Would you have screamed too? Or would you have swallowed your pain, letting the jewels become another casualty of Meghan's ambition? Harry didn't stay silent. He couldn't. But that raises a bigger question. Was Harry's outburst truly about Meghan? Or was it about himself? About the guilt he's carried, the distance from William, the choices that led him from royal duty to Montecito isolation? Maybe calling Meghan a thief was less about her, and more about what he feared he had lost, his connection to Diana, his role as her son, her protector, her legacy bearer. And as the night bled into silence, and Meghan reportedly stormed from the room, something irreversible had shifted. Staff described a mansion cloaked in tension, with Harry pacing for hours, muttering to himself, while Meghan locked herself away in another wing. A house divided, a marriage fractured, and a legacy desecrated. But here's where it gets even more shocking. Because the next morning, as Harry sought solace in phone calls and Meghan stewed in silence, news of the fight began reaching ears it was never supposed to reach. Not just in Hollywood circles, but in royal ones. And the reaction in London? Far from sympathetic. Because William, the keeper of Diana's sapphire ring and the future king, had feared this day would come. And when he heard the words Harry had screamed in Montecito, he knew the pact was broken. But what William did next, that would throw fuel onto an already raging fire. And it was a move no one saw coming. What if I told you that the real ghost haunting Montecito that night wasn't Meghan's ambition, nor Harry's rage, but Diana herself. Not in a literal sense, of course, but in the power of her memory, etched into every jewel, every story, every whispered comparison that followed her sons into adulthood. Diana never leaves the room. She's there when William slips her sapphire onto Kate's hand. She's there when Harry clenches his fist in the face of paparazzi flashbulbs. And she was there, in Montecito, when Harry screamed at Meghan, because the accusation wasn't just about theft. It was about the theft of Diana's soul. So let's rewind. Let's look at the ghost of Diana, not through tabloids or glossy magazines, but through the eyes of her sons. Because to understand why Harry's fury cut so deep, you have to understand what Diana's jewels actually meant. When Diana was alive, her jewelry collection was more than adornments. They were symbols of her rise, her rebellion, her heartbreak. The sapphire engagement ring that captivated the world, chosen by Diana herself, not by the Queen's courtiers. The pearl chokers she wore to reinvent herself after her separation from Charles. The bracelets she gifted to friends as tokens of loyalty. Each piece told a story, a diary of sorts, etched in gold and sapphire and diamond. And when she died, tragically, far too young, her sons inherited not just her grief, but her legacy. Among the legal wrangling and estate settlements, Diana left one clear wish: that her jewelry be passed to her boys, so that one day, their wives might wear them, carrying her spirit into the future. Imagine that moment. Two young boys, stripped of their mother, clinging to the idea that her touch, her warmth, could live on through the jewels they held. Now, here's where the ghost lingers. William, the heir, received the sapphire ring, a symbol of his mother's marriage and, ironically, her heartbreak. But it found new life when he gave it to Kate, the steady, dutiful woman who slipped seamlessly into the role of Princess of Wales. The ring became less about scandal, more about continuity. Diana's ghost smiled on that one. Harry, on the other hand, was left with other treasures. Bracelets Diana wore on her most iconic visits. Earrings that dangled during her legendary speeches. Pieces less famous, but no less important. For Harry, they weren't just baubles. They were talismans. Connections to the mother who kissed his forehead goodnight and promised him he was loved. They were the anchors of a boy who often felt adrift. But then came Meghan. And here's where the contradiction strikes like lightning. Meghan, to the outside world, was initially cast as the new Diana, an independent spirit, a woman of the people, a figure who would modernize the monarchy. The press adored that comparison at first, but soon, admiration morphed into accusation. Meghan wasn't just inspired by Diana. Some critics claimed she was trying to become her. Do you see where this is going? Diana's ghost wasn't just a presence. It was a battleground. When Meghan wore Diana's butterfly earrings on a royal tour, the public swooned. But behind palace walls, there were whispers. Whispers that Meghan was draping herself in symbols she hadn't earned. When Meghan flashed Diana's gold bracelet at her wedding reception, it was framed as a touching tribute. But critics asked, was it truly about Diana, or about Meghan attaching herself to Diana's saint-like image? And here's the twist: Harry encouraged it. At first, he wanted his wife to feel his mother's spirit, to feel welcome. He gave Meghan Diana's aquamarine cocktail ring for their wedding night, a powerful symbol of something blue from the most iconic royal rebel. But as time went on, something shifted. What had begun as homage began to feel like appropriation. Now let's pause. Imagine you're Harry. You're grieving, vulnerable, still haunted by the flash of camera bulbs that chased your mother to her death. You want your wife to connect with your mother's spirit. But then you see her flaunting those symbols in ways that feel off, feel forced, feel exploitative. How long before that ghost stops being comforting and starts being accusatory? Insiders say that Meghan's obsession with Diana's jewelry grew over time. She wanted more pieces, more appearances, more opportunities to step into Diana's shoes, literally and figuratively. And while Meghan may have believed she was honoring Diana, to Harry and certainly to William, it started to look like something else entirely. But let's dig deeper. Diana's ghost wasn't just in the jewelry. It was in the rivalry between the brothers. William, the heir, always destined to carry Diana's legacy with the weight of the crown. Harry, the spare, always struggling to find his place in her memory. That pact they made as boys, to protect her heirlooms, wasn't just about jewels. It was about holding on to their mother together, even as the world tore them apart. And now, in Montecito, that pact lay in ruins. Harry's scream, "You thief," wasn't only about Meghan. It was about William, about the divide between them, about the broken bond forged in Diana's memory. In that one moment, the ghost of Diana rose between Harry and Meghan like a wall. But let me ask you this. If Meghan truly believed she was carrying Diana's torch, why would William remain so cold, so distrustful of her? Why would the future king never once publicly endorse Meghan's connection to Diana, while he constantly reinforced Kate's? Was it because he saw through Meghan's performance? Or was it because he feared Diana's ghost was being rewritten in a narrative that didn't belong to her? And here's where it gets even more unsettling. Some reports suggest Meghan wanted to redesign certain pieces, to take Diana's jewels and modernize them into sleeker, Hollywood-friendly designs. Imagine the audacity. To take treasures preserved by a grieving family and reshape them into something unrecognizable. To William, this would have been sacrilege. To Harry, it was betrayal. So what does this tell us? That Diana's ghost wasn't resting peacefully. She was being pulled in two directions, by sons who saw her as sacred, and by a daughter-in-law who saw her as a symbol. And if you thought the confrontation in Montecito was the climax, you'd be wrong. That was only the spark. The real firestorm was still to come. Because Diana's ghost, and the jewels she left behind, didn't just haunt Harry and Meghan's marriage. They threatened to reignite the bitter rivalry between the brothers. But when William finally stepped into the drama, what he revealed about Diana's legacy stunned even Harry. And it would change the story of the jewels forever. Tell me this, how far would someone go to claim an image? To seize a narrative? To take symbols that don't belong to them and wear them as if they were theirs all along? That's the question that looms over Meghan Markle's obsession with royal jewels. Because while most people saw glitter and glam, insiders say Meghan saw something much more potent: power. Think about it. Jewelry in the royal family isn't just decoration. It's identity. Every tiara, every necklace, every ring has a history, passed down through centuries, tied to monarchs and moments of victory or scandal. And Diana's pieces? They were on another level entirely. They weren't just royal, they were iconic. They carried the ghost of a woman who defied the monarchy and became a global legend. Wearing them wasn't just fashion, it was making a statement. So, when Meghan stepped into the royal world, she knew the eyes of the world were upon her. She knew comparisons to Diana were inevitable, and insiders claim she leaned into it hard. Let's rewind to those early days, when Meghan was still being framed as a breath of fresh air in the House of Windsor. She made no secret of wanting to emulate Diana's compassion and modern touch. But behind the scenes, whispers suggest her fascination with Diana's heirlooms bordered on fixation. Remember the butterfly earrings? Meghan wore them during her first royal tour with Harry. They were small, delicate, yet instantly recognizable to those who remembered Diana. The press lit up with headlines. Diana's legacy lives on. The world swooned. But in royal circles, the move was calculated. Why wear those earrings so early, on such a public stage, unless Meghan wanted to plant a message? Was it really about honoring Diana, or about wrapping herself in Diana's untouchable aura to shield from criticism? And then there was the gold bracelet. Meghan donned it at her wedding reception, a night already saturated with symbolism. To many, it was touching, a bride wearing her late mother-in-law's keepsake. But to others, especially within the firm, it seemed too convenient, too polished, too much like an actress hitting her mark. The timing was perfect for maximum impact, maximum coverage, maximum comparison. Now pause and ask yourself, was this admiration or ambition? Because if we track Meghan's choices, a pattern emerges. Each time she wore Diana's pieces, it was at moments where the narrative needed a boost. Criticism too loud? Wear Diana's earrings. Headlines hostile? Step out with Diana's bracelet. Meghan understood something fundamental. Diana's image was untouchable. To be tied to Diana, even visually, was to inherit the public's sympathy. But where does tribute end and strategy begin? Even Harry, at first, encouraged it. He wanted Meghan to feel his mother's presence. He believed Diana would have adored her, supported her, defended her against the monarchy's coldness. But insiders say that as months passed, Harry began to notice the pattern too. Meghan wasn't wearing the jewels quietly, privately, in intimate moments. She was selecting them for maximum visibility, maximum press, maximum impact. And it wasn't just Diana's jewels. Meghan's fascination stretched to the royal vault itself. The tiaras, the brooches, the necklaces that symbolized generations of monarchy. Do you remember the story of the wedding tiara? How Meghan supposedly demanded a specific tiara, one with emeralds, that the Queen ultimately denied her. The clash was so severe that Harry allegedly snapped. What Meghan wants, Meghan gets. But she didn't get it. She had to settle for another tiara. And in that moment, Meghan's hunger for royal jewels became the stuff of legend. Why did it matter so much? Was it vanity? Was it insecurity? Or was it the deeper understanding that in the monarchy, jewelry isn't just sparkle, it's status? Think about Catherine, Princess of Wales. Every time she wears Diana's sapphire ring, the world is reminded of continuity, of tradition, of dignity. When she dons Diana's tiara, it's framed as honoring her mother-in-law, never exploiting her. The press praises Kate's restraint, her elegance, her subtlety. Meghan, in contrast, was seen as hungry, impatient, insistent. And maybe she was. Maybe she knew she'd never have the same access as Kate, never be given the same respect by the firm. So she tried to carve out her power by reaching for the jewels that mattered most, the ones tied to Diana. But here's the contradiction. Meghan argued publicly that she didn't care about titles, jewels, or tradition. She and Harry left the UK, after all, to escape that world. And yet, behind closed doors, she seemed to covet the very symbols of royalty she rejected. That contradiction, the disdain for monarchy mixed with the desire for its trappings, would become one of the sharpest blades cutting into her reputation. And Harry? He was caught in the middle. At first, he defended Meghan against every criticism. He saw his mother's spirit in her, believed she could carry Diana's torch. But over time, he began to see the difference between honoring Diana and imitating her, between cherishing the jewels and using them. And by the time Montecito became the stage for his furious outburst, his patience had worn thin. Let me ask you, if Meghan truly wanted to honor Diana, why did she keep pushing for access to jewels beyond what was given to her? Why insist on tiaras she couldn't have? Why wear Diana's treasures at moments of controversy rather than private reflection? Was it because Meghan needed Diana's ghost to shield her from criticism? Or was it because she knew Diana's aura was the one thing the monarchy couldn't take away from her? And here's the part that still shocks even the most jaded insiders. Whispers claim Meghan once suggested altering certain pieces, modernizing them, updating Diana's style into something sleeker, trendier, more Hollywood. The thought alone sent chills through those who believed Diana's jewels were sacred. To redesign them would be to erase history itself. Imagine Harry's face when he learned of this. Imagine William's fury if he suspected it to be true. Because for William, Diana's heirlooms are not props. They are the last tangible connection to his mother. For Harry, they were supposed to be sacred reminders. And for Meghan, they seemed to be tools, beautiful, sparkling tools to build an image. So when Harry screamed that night, when he called Meghan a thief, it wasn't about a bracelet or a ring. It was about years of obsession, of calculation, of crossing lines. It was about Meghan's hunger colliding with Harry's grief. And in that collision, the ghost of Diana appeared once more, shaking the foundations of their marriage. But this isn't where the story ends. Because while Meghan was playing dress-up with Diana's ghost, others in Montecito were watching. Staff who saw too much, neighbors who heard too much, stylists who were whispered to, and some of them began talking. And what they revealed about Montecito's secrets would make Harry's scream seem like just the beginning of a much darker unraveling. What do you think happens when the walls meant to protect you start to betray you? When the very house you built as your sanctuary becomes the place where whispers echo louder than your own voice? That's Montecito. On the surface, it's palm trees, beaches, and luxury mansions tucked away from prying eyes. But behind those golden gates, secrets don't stay buried. They slip out in whispers to staff, to stylists, to neighbors, and eventually into the wider world. And Montecito, Meghan and Harry's carefully curated haven, is no exception. What was supposed to be their fortress of freedom is, insiders say, now a house haunted by secrets. Let's peel back the curtain. The staff at Montecito, cooks, cleaners, assistants, have long been described as temporary. Few last more than a year. Why? Because the atmosphere inside that house isn't just tense, it's combustible. Former aides describe an endless tug-of-war between Harry's grief and Meghan's ambition. 1 minute, the house feels like a shrine to Diana, with photos, candles, and her jewelry carefully displayed. The next, it becomes Meghan's stage, stylists arriving discreetly, photographers slipping in for fittings, jewels being laid out not for remembrance, but for reinvention. And that's where the whispers begin. One staffer reportedly told friends that Meghan had a secret jewelry closet. Not just her own collection of designer pieces, but trays and cases of Diana's heirlooms. Pieces she kept in her possession, tucked away from public view. Harry believed these were safe, untouched, waiting for the right moment. But Meghan? Meghan allegedly treated them differently. Fittings were held late at night. Jewelry was tried on with gowns meant for Hollywood galas. And according to one shocking claim, replicas were commissioned so that originals could remain hidden while copies were shown off. Think about that for a moment. Replicas. If true, what does that mean? That Meghan wanted freedom to wear the jewels without scrutiny? Or that she wanted to control the originals, keep them in her grasp while parading fakes to the cameras? Either way, the optics are staggering. Neighbors noticed odd patterns too. Black SUVs coming and going at strange hours. Stylists flying in quietly, staying only long enough for consultations. What were they consulting on? Gowns, yes. But more specifically, accessorizing those gowns with heirlooms that weren't supposed to leave their cases. And Harry, did he know? Or was he blind to it until that fateful night when he walked in on Meghan with the jewelry box open, the velvet trays exposed? Some insiders suggest that Harry had been warned, that staff had whispered to him before, gently hinting that Meghan's handling of Diana's treasures wasn't what he thought it was. But Harry, blinded by love, refused to see it, until he couldn't ignore it anymore. But here's the chilling part. Once secrets begin to leak, they spread like wildfire. One stylist, allegedly sworn to confidentiality, confided in a friend. That friend told another. Soon, Hollywood circles buzzed with quiet amusement. Meghan had Diana's jewels in Montecito, and she was experimenting with them. By the time whispers reached London, the story had morphed into something more sinister. Not just that Meghan wore the jewels, but that some of them might be missing. Yes, missing. Could it be true? Could pieces of Diana's collection, entrusted to her sons, have vanished into the chaos of Montecito? Replicas in their place? This rumor, once dismissed as tabloid fantasy, suddenly had legs when Harry's scream was heard across the estate. Because thief isn't a word you hurl casually at your spouse. It's a word born of fear, of evidence, of something lost. And remember, the royal family knows. The moment whispers reached the palace, alarms went off. Diana's jewels aren't just private possessions, they're part of history. They belong to the family, to the monarchy, to the memory of the people's princess. To lose them would be unthinkable, which raises a terrifying possibility. Was Harry's outburst not just a marital fight, but a desperate attempt to cover up something bigger? Something already spiraling out of control? Imagine the pressure. Meghan allegedly trying on jewels, staff quietly alarmed, Hollywood insiders gossiping, and London watching closely. The perfect storm for a meltdown. And in that storm, Harry finally exploded. But this is where Montecito's secrets grow darker. Because staff didn't just talk about jewels. They talked about surveillance. About cameras installed in places even Harry didn't know about. Meghan allegedly monitoring comings and goings, controlling access to certain rooms. Was it paranoia? Or was it strategy? Was Meghan protecting herself, or hiding what she didn't want others to see? One insider claims Meghan even had certain jewels locked away in places only she knew. Harry had keys to safes, but not all of them. How's that for irony? The man who inherited Diana's treasures couldn't always access them in his own house. Now let's pause. Ask yourself, what drives someone to those lengths? Is it insecurity? Is it hunger for control? Or is it the fear that without those jewels, without Diana's aura, her image crumbles? And yet, as scandalous as this sounds, it's not the end. Because Montecito's secrets weren't just whispered, they were sold. Think about that. Staff who left disgruntled. Stylists who couldn't keep quiet. Paparazzi who always pay top dollar for inside tips. One wrong word to one wrong person, and suddenly, Montecito's carefully crafted facade shattered. And here's where it all collides. Harry's scream wasn't just heard by Meghan. It wasn't just heard by the staff, who stayed silent in the shadows. It was heard by the world, because the world had already been primed by the whispers. They were waiting for confirmation. And Harry's outburst confirmed it. Something was very, very wrong inside that mansion. Because the moment those whispers reached London, the firm began to move. Quiet inquiries, subtle investigations, royal aides dusting off inventories, double-checking what was supposed to be accounted for. And William? When he heard, he didn't just seethe in silence. He prepared to act. And his intervention would pit brother against brother in a way Diana's ghost never could have imagined. Have you ever heard a scream so raw, so unfiltered, that it tells you more than any speech ever could? That's what happened in Montecito that night. Neighbors, used to silence and privacy, froze when the sound ripped through the stillness. It wasn't laughter. It wasn't a lover's quarrel. It was rage. Prince Harry, the boy who grew up under the world's gaze, the man who left it all behind for love, now shouting at the woman he gave it all up for. His words, sharp as shattered glass. "You thief! Get out right now!" But what really happened in those minutes behind closed doors? What escalated a simmering tension into a volcanic eruption? Let's walk through it. Harry had entered the room quietly. He wasn't supposed to be there. Meghan had sent staff away, insisting she needed private preparation. But Harry, restless, followed his instincts. And there it was, the jewelry box. Velvet trays open. The unmistakable glimmer of Diana's legacy spread out like a forbidden altar. Meghan, caught in the act, wasn't flustered. She was poised, as if expecting him. "Harry," she said, cool, steady, "you don't understand." But Harry did understand, or at least he thought he did. In that instant, everything he had tried to deny came crashing down. The whispers of staff, the hints of missing pieces, the way Meghan flaunted jewels at the perfect moment to soften headlines. It all aligned in one unbearable truth. The woman he trusted had crossed the line he swore no one would ever cross. "Those are not props," Harry snapped. His voice, once gentle with Meghan, trembled with fury. "They're not costumes. They're my mother. Do you hear me? My mother." Meghan didn't back down. She stepped closer, lifting one piece. A bracelet Diana wore on some of her most iconic appearances. "Your mother would want me to wear them," she argued. She wanted her legacy to live on. What better way than through me? Can you imagine the audacity? The confidence? Meghan wasn't apologizing. She was justifying. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was demanding recognition. Harry's chest tightened. All those years of grief, of defending Meghan to his family, of breaking ties to protect her, now colliding with the one boundary he thought sacred. Diana's memory, Diana's jewels, his inheritance of love and pain, treated as ornaments. And then it snapped. The scream. "You thief, get out right now." Neighbors described the sound as guttural, animalistic, unlike anything they'd ever imagined from Harry. Staff who lingered in nearby rooms froze, too terrified to move. The echo rolled through the estate, bouncing off manicured walls and polished marble. Meghan's face hardened. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She stood her ground. "If you don't want me here," she said coldly, "say it. But don't you dare call me a thief." Harry's eyes burned with rage. "Then tell me, where are the missing pieces? Where's the necklace that was promised to William's daughter? Where's the bracelet that's supposed to be in the vault? Where, Meghan?" Silence. That silence was heavier than the scream. It was the silence of secrets, of knowledge unspoken. Meghan turned away, her hand trembling only slightly as she placed the bracelet back in its case. Do you feel the tension? Can you imagine that pause? The kind where both know the truth, but neither will speak it aloud? Harry stormed out, his footsteps heavy, the sound of doors slamming reverberating like thunder. Meghan, left alone with the jewels, didn't chase after him. She simply sat, staring at the pieces that now glowed like accusations in the dim light. But here's the twist. This wasn't just about jewels. Not really. The jewels were symbols, yes, but the fight was about betrayal, identity, and power. Harry wasn't just accusing Meghan of theft. He was accusing her of stealing Diana's memory, of reshaping it for her own ambition. And Meghan wasn't just defending herself. She was staking her claim to the legacy, declaring she had as much right to it as anyone. Now let's stop and ask, whose side are you on? Do you see Harry's pain, The raw wound of a boy who lost his mother and clings to her possessions as lifelines? Or do you see Meghan's perspective, the woman cast into the spotlight, judged harshly, seeking validation through the very symbols that once comforted Harry? But the fight didn't end with words. Staff later revealed that Harry spent the night pacing, muttering to himself, his fists clenching as he replayed every moment. Meghan, meanwhile, locked herself in another wing, making phone calls in hushed tones, her voice sharp, her words impossible to catch. By morning, the house was a battlefield of silence. No words exchanged, no eye contact, just the suffocating weight of what had been said. And then, the fallout began. Because secrets never stay in Montecito. A staff member, unable to contain what they had heard, confided in a trusted friend. That friend told another. Within days, whispers of the fight spread across California's tight celebrity circles. By the time it crossed the Atlantic, it was more than gossip. It was scandal. And when word reached William, the brother who once shared a pact to protect their mother's memory, his reaction wasn't one of sympathy. It was fury. Because William knew something Harry didn't. Something about the jewels, the pact, and the promise that was supposed to bind them forever. And once William spoke, the ghost of Diana wouldn't just haunt Montecito. It would divide the brothers more deeply than ever before. But what William revealed would shake Harry to his core. And no one, least of all Meghan, saw it coming. Do you remember that moment, years ago, when two young princes stood side by side, their faces pale with grief as they walked behind their mother's coffin? That image burned itself into history. William and Harry, bound by tragedy, bound by loss, bound by the promise that they would never let Diana's memory fade. That bond was more than just brotherhood, it was an oath. And part of that oath, whispered in the shadow of their grief, revolved around Diana's heirlooms. Yes, there was a pact, a secret understanding between two boys who became men in the harsh glare of public scrutiny. That Diana's jewels, her treasures, her symbols of love and rebellion, would never divide them. That they would split them fairly. That they would honor her through their choices. That the jewels would remain in safe hands, treated with reverence, never tainted by exploitation. But the problem with pacts is that they're fragile. They depend on trust. And trust, once cracked, never looks the same again. Let's rewind. After Diana's death, her jewelry collection was carefully cataloged and preserved. William and Harry were each allowed to select pieces. William took Diana's sapphire engagement ring, the same one he would one day slip onto Kate's finger in a gesture that fused past and future. Harry chose a Cartier watch, a bracelet, and other intimate treasures. But there was an agreement. Nothing would be locked away forever. The brothers could share. They could pass pieces on to their wives. They would ensure that Diana's memory wasn't locked in a vault, but carried forward through their families. For years, that pact held. William, the steady heir, offered Kate select pieces, always framed as tributes. Harry, the more emotional spare, kept his mother's treasures close, privately treasuring them, occasionally allowing Meghan to wear them. On the surface, it seemed balanced. Two brothers, united by loss, honoring their mother in their own ways. But then came the cracks. William watched Meghan with suspicion. To him, Diana's jewels weren't tools of branding. They weren't stage props for Hollywood reinvention. They were relics of love and duty. And he saw in Meghan's choices a hunger, a desire to elevate herself by wrapping herself in Diana's aura. Harry didn't want to see it. At least, not at first. He defended Meghan. He reminded William of the pact, of their mother's wish that her daughters-in-law were her treasures. But William wasn't convinced. He warned Harry, "Be careful. The legacy isn't a costume." Now let's pause. Can you imagine how those words landed? Harry, already insecure about his role as the spare, hearing his older brother suggest Meghan wasn't worthy? It deepened the divide. The pact, meant to keep them together, was already beginning to tear them apart. And then came the sapphire ring. That ring wasn't always William's. Did you know Harry originally had it? Yes, after Diana's death, Harry selected the sapphire engagement ring. But when William decided to propose to Kate, Harry gave it to him. A brotherly sacrifice. A gesture of love. Harry said, she should have it. It was meant to be noble. But years later, in Montecito, Harry began to wonder, had he given away too much? Had he surrendered the most iconic symbol of Diana to Kate? leaving Meghan with less to claim? That thought festered. And Meghan, insiders say, didn't let it go. She reminded Harry, again and again, that William and Kate had the ring, the tiaras, the official spotlight, while she had scraps. Wasn't it only fair, she asked, that she have more? That she modernize what she was given? That she step into Diana's shoes not just in spirit, but in sparkle? So when Harry caught Meghan in Montecito with the jewelry box open, it wasn't just betrayal in that moment. It was the collapse of years of promises. The pact, the brotherhood, the memory of two boys who swore never to let their mother's treasures divide them. Now think of William's reaction when the whispers reached him. He didn't just hear that Meghan had been trying on the jewels. He heard that pieces were missing, replicas commissioned, alterations discussed. To William, this wasn't just Meghan's ambition. It was Harry's betrayal of their pact. Harry, the brother who once gave him the ring, was now accused of letting their mother's legacy slip into chaos. And William's fury? It wasn't just royal duty. It was personal. He is said to have called Harry. The conversation, according to insiders, was brutal. William demanded answers. Harry tried to explain, to defend Meghan, but William wasn't having it. "You've broken the pact," he reportedly said. "You let her turn our mother's memory into a show." Harry snapped back, reminding William that he'd given him the sapphire, that he'd sacrificed for his happiness. But William only grew colder. "And look where it's gotten us," he said. "You screaming at your wife. You calling her a thief. You've lost control. Let me ask you, how do you come back from that? From a brother accusing you not only of betrayal but of weakness? From the very person who should understand your pain, turning it into judgment? And here's the haunting irony. The pact meant to bind William and Harry together after Diana's death may be the very thing that drove them further apart. Because in Montecito, when Harry screamed at Meghan, it wasn't just about her. It was about William, about the ring, about the pact, about the sense that Diana's ghost was no longer uniting her sons, but dividing them in ways she never could have imagined. And yet, the story doesn't end there. Because while William raged from afar, Meghan wasn't silent. She was furious too. Furious at being called a thief. Furious at being painted as an interloper. And her response, the way she fought back against Harry, against William, against the very institution she once longed to belong to, would set in motion the next devastating chapter. Because Meghan didn't just defend herself. She decided to go on the offensive. And the way she struck back left even Harry reeling. What do you do when the person you love the most ignores every warning sign? When you see disaster looming and try to pull them back, only for them to charge headlong into the fire? That's exactly what William felt. Because long before Montecito erupted with Harry's screams, William had already seen the cracks forming. He had tried, again and again, to warn his younger brother. And each time, his words were dismissed as jealousy, as condescension, as the heir looking down on the spare. But the truth is, William's warnings weren't about envy. They were about Diana, about the promise they made, about protecting her legacy. Let's go back. When Meghan first entered the royal scene, the press adored her. She was glamorous, modern, articulate, everything the monarchy seemed to need in a new era. But behind the palace gates, William felt unease. He knew how the royal machine worked. He knew the dangers of someone arriving with ambition sharper than tradition could contain. He had lived it with his own mother, who, though beloved, was seen as too independent, too emotional, too disruptive. And William had seen how quickly the crown turned love into control. So when Meghan began requesting jewels, specific tiaras, specific heirlooms, William took notice. To him, it was a red flag. Not because Meghan wasn't entitled to wear pieces, but because of how she asked. Demands, not requests. Impatience, not reverence. The emerald tiara story wasn't just about a fashion choice. It was, in William's eyes, about a mindset. Meghan wanted what she wanted, and tradition was just an obstacle. And William, remembering the pact, felt the first crack of dread. He pulled Harry aside. He reminded him of their agreement. Diana's heirlooms weren't for exploitation. They were sacred. He told Harry bluntly, "Be careful. Don't let her turn mother into a costume." But Harry, deeply in love, bristled. He snapped back that Meghan had every right. That Diana would have loved Meghan. That William was being controlling, unfair, and even cruel. For Harry, William's words felt like another example of the Crown's coldness, another attempt to police Meghan. He defended her with fire. And so, William grew quiet. But that didn't mean he stopped watching. Every time Meghan wore Diana's jewelry, William tracked it. The butterfly earrings on tour. The gold bracelet at the wedding reception. Each time, his unease deepened. Each time, he remembered the pact they made as boys. He feared that Harry wasn't protecting Diana's memory. He was letting it be repackaged, remodeled, and sold. Now pause here. Imagine William's perspective. He is the heir, the one destined to carry the monarchy into the future. He carries the sapphire ring on Kate's hand as both tribute and burden. He guards Diana's tiara for his daughter one day. And across the ocean, he sees Meghan, already estranged from the family, using Diana's treasures as accessories for photo ops and glossy interviews. Wouldn't you feel fury rising in your chest? Wouldn't you fear your mother's ghost was being turned into a brand? That's why William issued his second warning. After Harry and Meghan's wedding, after the tiara debacle, after the first tour, he called Harry privately. This time his tone was sharper, more direct. "You're forgetting the pact," he reportedly said. "You're letting her do what she wants with things that don't belong to her." Harry erupted. He accused William of arrogance, of failing to see Meghan's worth. He reminded William that he had given him the sapphire ring, the most famous jewel of all, without hesitation. "Don't lecture me about the pact," Harry snapped. "I've sacrificed more than you ever will." The phone went silent. Two brothers, once united by grief, now divided by love and suspicion. And so, William retreated again. He stopped warning Harry. But inside, he grew harder, more resolute, more convinced that Meghan wasn't simply reckless. She was dangerous to their mother's memory. By the time Montecito's scream reached him, William wasn't surprised. He was furious, yes, but not surprised. Because to him, it was inevitable. He had warned Harry. Twice. He had told him this would happen. And now it had. But here's where it twists. Because William, unlike Harry, didn't just sit in silence. He began planning. He began quietly tightening the grip on Diana's remaining heirlooms, ensuring they would never again be mishandled. He began speaking to aides, checking inventories, making sure every piece was accounted for. And then, the most chilling move of all, William began preparing to confront Harry not just as a brother, but as the future king. Because if Meghan had indeed crossed the line, if pieces were missing, if Diana's legacy had been compromised, then this wasn't just a family squabble. It was a royal matter. And William, heir to the crown, had no choice but to act. But here's the question. Did William's warnings come from love or from control? Did he truly want to protect Diana's memory? Or did he want to keep Harry in his place, the spare who must always bow to the heir? Because when William finally made his move, it wasn't just protective. It was decisive, ruthless, and final. And it would force Harry into a corner he could never escape from. Have you ever noticed how Meghan Markle seems to straddle two worlds, the royal image and the Hollywood stage? On one hand, she tells the world she's moved beyond the crown, that she doesn't need the titles, the traditions, or the jewels. And yet, in the very same breath, she leans into the glitz, the sparkle, the carefully staged photo shoots that scream of status and prestige. It's a contradiction, but it's also a strategy. And nowhere is that clearer than in her alleged attempt at a Hollywood makeover, using Diana's jewels as props for her own reinvention. Let's dig into this. Hollywood is a place built on reinvention. Actresses go from ingenues to icons, from reality stars to moguls, all through image. Meghan knew this world intimately. Before she was a duchess, she was an actress on Suits. She knew the game. How you look, how you brand yourself, what stories you tell, matters more than anything. So when she left the palace with Harry and landed back in California, she didn't arrive as a cast-off duchess. She arrived determined to become something bigger, a global brand. And for Meghan, Diana's legacy was the ultimate accessory. Stylists close to the Sussexes whisper that Meghan's obsession with Diana's jewelry wasn't just sentimental. It was calculated. Each piece she wore was meant to tell a story. Not Harry's story, not Diana's story, but her story. She wanted to embody Diana's aura, to recast herself as the modern-day princess of the people, but this time, on her own terms, and with Hollywood's cameras capturing every angle. Think back to the Oprah interview. Meghan's dress was simple, understated. But what caught attention? The jewelry. The butterfly earrings. The bracelet. All Diana's. The symbolism wasn't subtle, it was deliberate. Meghan wasn't just speaking her truth. She was cloaking herself in Diana's truth, borrowing her shine, her martyrdom, her saint-like public image. And it worked. Headlines the next day weren't just about Meghan's claims. They were about Diana. Diana's presence felt at Oprah interview, the press wrote. But here's the irony. It wasn't Diana speaking. It was Meghan. And she knew it. Hollywood ate it up. Producers, PR agents, stylists, they all saw the potential. Meghan wasn't just a duchess. She was the living echo of Diana, the one figure the monarchy could never control. Imagine the power in that. Imagine the leverage. But here's the darker side. Insiders claim Meghan wasn't content with just borrowing Diana's image. She wanted to reshape it. Rumors swirled of her talking to stylists about altering pieces, shortening necklaces, resetting stones, modernizing designs. To the Hollywood eye, it made sense. Trends change. Jewelry should evolve. But to Harry, and especially to William, this was unthinkable. Diana's jewels weren't trinkets. They were relics. To redesign them was to erase her history. And yet, Meghan allegedly pushed anyway. Why? Because in Hollywood, you don't wear history, you remake it. You turn it into something fresh, something marketable, something that works on red carpets. Meghan, caught between the world of royalty and the world of celebrity, chose the latter. And Diana's ghost became her ticket. Now let's pause. Ask yourself, is that ambition or exploitation? Is Meghan truly honoring Diana by making her memory relevant in a modern Hollywood context? Or is she using Diana as a brand, a shield, a costume to wear when the cameras roll? Consider this. Meghan's inner circle included stylists and image consultants who allegedly saw Diana's collection as untapped potential. Not in terms of sentimental value, but in terms of marketing value. Imagine Diana's aquamarine ring at a Hollywood gala. Imagine Diana's pearls on a Netflix premiere red carpet. The headlines write themselves. Meghan, glowing, draped in Diana, presented not as an outsider, but as heir to a legacy the monarchy could never control. And Harry? He was torn. At first, he indulged it. He gave Meghan Diana's aquamarine cocktail ring, encouraged her to wear her mother's bracelet. But as time went on, he saw the difference between honoring and exploiting. He began to feel that Meghan wasn't carrying Diana's legacy, she was repackaging it, selling it. And in Hollywood, the line between homage and performance blurred until it disappeared completely. This was why, when Harry burst out in Montecito, his fury wasn't just about jewels. It was about watching his wife transform his mother's spirit into a Hollywood accessory. For Harry, Diana was sacred. For Meghan, Diana was useful. But here's the contradiction. Meghan told the world she wanted privacy. She told Oprah she just wanted a quiet life. And yet, every move, the Netflix deals, the Spotify podcast, the glamorous magazine covers, pointed to someone who wanted not silence, but spotlight. And nothing gave her more spotlight than Diana's jewelry. Do you see the irony? Meghan left royalty but couldn't leave the jewels. She rejected the crown but coveted its sparkle. She said she wanted peace but dressed for power. And in doing so, she created a storm that no amount of PR could control. Now, Hollywood may have applauded her reinvention, but across the Atlantic, William was seething. He saw what Meghan was doing. He heard the whispers of jewels being tried on, replicas being made, alterations being considered. To him, it wasn't just offensive, it was sacrilegious. The heir of Diana's legacy, watching his sister-in-law parade it like a brand. And so, William prepared to act. Not as a brother, but as the protector of Diana's memory. Because if Meghan thought Hollywood would embrace her makeover, she underestimated the fury waiting for her in London. And when William's intervention came, it wasn't quiet. It wasn't forgiving. It was devastating. Picture this. Beneath Buckingham Palace, hidden behind thick stone walls and iron gates, lies one of the most secure collections in the world. The Royal Vault. It's not a bank. It's not a museum. It's something stranger, more powerful. A treasure chest of history itself. Crowns, tiaras, brooches, necklaces, rings, some hundreds of years old, some passed through the hands of queens and princesses, others famous enough to be recognized instantly. But among all of it, there's one category of pieces that holds a weight heavier than diamonds: Diana's heirlooms. And here's the contradiction. While William and the firm worked tirelessly to keep these relics under lock and key, Harry let them slip into Montecito, into a home surrounded not by palace guards, but by stylists, PR agents, and Hollywood whispers. So let's talk about the vault versus Montecito, because this is where the story turns from personal to institutional. The royal vault is more than storage, it's symbolism. It represents continuity, discipline, tradition. Inside, every piece is cataloged, guarded, and insured not just for value, but for meaning. When Kate wears the lover's knot tiara, it isn't random. It's been cleared, prepared, and approved. It carries a message. Every sparkle speaks. That's how the monarchy works. Nothing is casual. Now compare that to Montecito, a mansion in California with sprawling grounds, private gates, and modern locks, but no centuries-old system of checks and balances. Staff come and go. Photographers hover. Hollywood stylists slip in for consultations. The jewels there don't rest in state. They sit in boxes, sometimes in closets, sometimes, as whispers go, in Meghan's private cabinet. Can you feel the difference? And William did. When whispers of Montecito's secrets reached London, that Meghan had been fitting Diana's jewels in private, that replicas might exist, that pieces were missing, alarms rang through the palace. Not because of gossip, but because the vault represents order and Montecito represented chaos. To William, it wasn't just Harry losing control. It was Diana's memory being dragged from the sanctity of the vault into the unpredictability of California's celebrity circuit. Let me ask you this. Can you imagine the outrage inside those palace walls when they realized Diana's treasures, so carefully guarded, were being handled like Hollywood props? It wasn't just William who reacted. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense attitude, reportedly demanded clarity. Camilla, now queen consort, was said to have raised an eyebrow at the irony of Meghan craving jewels from an institution she claimed to despise. And Charles? He stayed quiet in public, but authorized subtle checks behind the scenes. Here's the irony. Diana herself once felt caged by those very jewels. They were beautiful, yes, but they were also symbols of the monarchy she was breaking away from. She reinvented herself after the divorce by wearing them differently, or sometimes not at all. And yet now, decades later, those same jewels had become the very center of battle between her sons, her daughters-in-law, and the crown itself. But let's pause on Harry. Because to him, the vault was a prison. He always hated the way everything had to be cataloged, approved, signed off. He wanted freedom. He wanted to take his mother's keepsakes and keep them close, personal. That's why he brought pieces into his new life in Montecito. They weren't crown jewels to him. They were private heirlooms. But here's the twist. Once Meghan began using them as symbols of status and image, Harry suddenly realized why the vault existed. Order, control, safeguarding. Without those, the jewels weren't treasures, they were liabilities. And that's when the tension exploded. Because Montecito wasn't safe enough, wasn't reverent enough, wasn't sacred enough. For William, this was proof that Harry had betrayed the pact. For Harry, it was proof that Meghan had betrayed his trust. Staff claim Harry even muttered, pacing late at night. They should have stayed in the vault. Imagine the pain in those words. The admission that his attempt at freedom had instead desecrated the very legacy he was trying to protect. But here's where the story sharpens. Because whispers from insiders suggest that not all of Diana's pieces are accounted for. Inventories checked in London raise questions. A necklace supposedly promised to Princess Charlotte? Missing. A bracelet meant for safekeeping? Unverified. And Meghan's late-night fittings, with stylists discreetly flown in, only fueled suspicion. Were these pieces altered? Were they hidden? Were they gone? And so, William acted. He didn't just scold Harry as a brother. He stepped into his role as heir. He began quietly pressing the firm to restrict access to Diana's heirlooms entirely, at least those not already with Kate. He argued that Meghan couldn't be trusted, that Harry had let his grief be manipulated, that the legacy had to be protected, not shared. And that's when the divide turned into a chasm. Because for Harry, this wasn't just about jewels. It was about William taking control again, playing the heir card, shutting him out, reminding him of his role as the spare. Diana's memory, the very thing that once united them, had now become a weapon. But the cliffhanger? It's not just about who holds the jewels now.